Millionaire-made pregnant wife, served dinner to Mistress years later. She owned his restaurant. They say behind every successful man stands a determined woman, but in this story, that woman was left in the shadows, pregnant and heartbroken. Welcome to the tumultuous world of Molly Delgado, who once served dinner to her husband's glamorous mistress while she was carrying his child. Betrayed, humiliated, and stripped of dignity, Molly found herself at the center of a scandal that spread like wildfire. The twist: years later, this same woman managed to rise from the ashes and claim ownership of the very restaurant where her husband had humiliated her. Get ready for an emotional roller coaster filled with drama, secrets, and triumph. Molly Delgado was born and raised in the peaceful, tree-lined suburbs of Bridgeport, Connecticut. She grew up in a modest household, the beloved daughter of Robert and Iris Morgan, who were educators at the local elementary school. From an early age, Molly learned the values of kindness, empathy, and hard work. Her parents did not have much money, but they had an abundance of love and taught their daughter to believe in the power of perseverance. Thomas Delgado, on the other hand, came from a prosperous family in Barcelona, Spain. His father was a successful restaurateur, owning several eateries along the bustling promenades that faced the Mediterranean Sea. As a young man, Thomas inherited a natural talent for hospitality. He knew how to charm people with a radiant smile and a knack for making guests feel like royalty. When he moved to the United States to expand his family's culinary empire, fate aligned, and his path crossed with Molly's one summer night at a friend's engagement party in Manhattan. Their meeting was straight out of a romance novel. Molly, dressed in a simple, knee-length blue dress that accentuated her kind eyes, caught Thomas's attention the moment she walked into the lavish ballroom. He was surrounded by admirers hoping to secure lucrative business deals or simply to bask in his powerful aura. Yet, despite all these influences swirling around him, Thomas's gaze locked on Molly. There was a gentle sparkle in her eyes that hinted at unshakable compassion. Molly, for her part, had heard whispers about the charismatic entrepreneur. She found his Spanish accent enchanting. It rolled off his tongue with confidence and magnetism. When they finally spoke, the chemistry was undeniable. He offered her a glass of champagne, and she, a bit shy, thanked him politely. They chatted about everything from traveling to philanthropic endeavors. Thomas spoke of wanting to open a new restaurant on the East Coast. Molly told him about her dream of being an educator and eventually opening a small art center for children. Their ideals matched effortlessly, and by the end of the night, they had exchanged numbers, hearts aflutter. After dating for nearly a year, their love story seemed to be headed for a blissful happily ever after. Despite occasional differences like Thomas's unwavering ambition, which sometimes overshadowed Molly's more wholesome, nurturing approach, the two found they complemented each other well. Molly loved how Thomas made her feel cherished, whisking her away on exciting vacations and introducing her to a world of fine dining she had never before experienced. In turn, Thomas found Molly's sincerity and warmth to be a refreshing break from the high-pressure, image-focused society that often surrounded him. When they finally married in an extravagant ceremony in Barcelona, the wedding was a glamorous fusion of cultures. Molly's family came from the States to witness the union, while Thomas's relatives displayed the proud Spanish heritage that had shaped his life. It looked like a match made in heaven. They spent their honeymoon touring Europe's finest gastronomic cities, Paris, Rome, and Milan. The couple seemed unstoppable, building a relationship on mutual dreams, or so Molly thought. She had no idea what storms lay ahead. In the early days of their marriage, Thomas was attentive. He made sure Molly had the best of everything: the biggest suite at any hotel they visited, the most luxurious car, and an endless budget for anything she might desire. He was thrilled to have found someone who not only admired his ambitions, but also offered him constant support and unwavering loyalty. In his eyes, Molly was the perfect wife, a gentle companion who looked up to him with wide-eyed admiration. But as the months progressed, slight cracks began to appear. Thomas's single-minded focus on expanding his business empire started to overshadow everything else. He spent more and more time with potential investors, forging alliances and nurturing connections with influential people in the culinary world. While Molly supported him, she noticed he was no longer the attentive partner she first met. Their once intimate weekend brunches turned into rushed meals where Thomas answered countless phone calls, typed furiously on his laptop, and barely acknowledged Molly's presence. Still, Molly tried to remain optimistic. She believed in the goodness of people, especially her husband, and trusted that their love would prevail. She reminded herself that marriages go through transitions and that success, especially on Thomas's scale, required sacrifices. Her own dream of opening an arts center for children was postponed indefinitely because she dedicated her time to helping Thomas with the practicalities of running multiple restaurants. They settled in a grand penthouse in Manhattan with sweeping views of Central Park. The space was opulent. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and rooms filled with expensive furniture that took Molly's breath away. It should have been an exciting new chapter in their lives, a testament to Thomas's success. And yet, behind the glamorous facade, Molly often felt lonely. She missed the modest, love-filled home she grew up in. She missed her parents' warm presence and their constant, gentle guidance. Despite these emotional distances, Molly soon discovered that she was pregnant, a moment she had dreamed of. Though nervous about bringing a child into the world at a time when Thomas was frequently away, she felt this new life would be the glue that held them together. Perhaps fatherhood would encourage Thomas to slow down and realize what truly mattered. When she told him the news, Thomas's eyes initially lit up, and he spun her around in a joyful embrace. For a moment, Molly felt reassured, but reality quickly returned. Over the next few months, their conversations revolved more around the opening of his new restaurant, the one named Delgado's Manhattan, than their impending parenthood. Eventually, the pregnancy began to take a toll on Molly. She experienced morning sickness and fatigue, her appetite fluctuated, and she was more emotional than ever. Hoping for Thomas's support, she tried to share every detail, yet he seemed perpetually on the go, caught in a whirlwind of business meetings, phone calls, and traveling. She found solace in old friends, like Donna Wheeler, her college roommate, and Chef Michel Dupont, a former colleague of Thomas, who had left to start his own restaurant in New Orleans. They both reminded her that she was strong and that she had to stand her ground. After all, this was her life too. Though Thomas's distance and obsession with work disappointed Molly, she never thought him capable of betrayal until the night she first spotted a small lipstick stain on his collar. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe a business associate had hugged him. Maybe the stain wasn't even lipstick. Clinging to her belief in his faithfulness, she pushed the thought aside. But within weeks, more signs surfaced. Occasionally, Thomas would come home in the early hours of the morning, making excuses about sudden crises at the restaurant. His phone buzzed constantly, and he would excuse himself to take calls in another room. When Molly asked, he muttered something about confidential business matters, and she swallowed the lump in her throat, hoping for a better explanation later. One fateful evening, Thomas strolled into the penthouse with a radiant smile. He declared that he wanted to host an exclusive dinner for a very special guest and some potential investors. He insisted that Molly, despite being nearly 6 months pregnant, help prepare some aspects of the dinner. Of course, the main dishes would be handled by a professional chef he hired for private events. He only asked Molly to do the finishing touches, like plating desserts, ensuring the table setting was immaculate, and maybe serving wine. Though the request felt unusual, why not let the catering staff handle it? Molly agreed, always eager to please her husband. On the night of the dinner, Molly's nerves were on high alert. She had set the table beautifully, carefully selecting the silverware and crystal glassware. She even arranged fresh roses in an elegant centerpiece. Meanwhile, she could hardly ignore her tense back muscles and swollen ankles. With each moment, her heart pounded, anticipating the arrival of these so-called special guests. When the guests arrived, one woman stood out immediately, Cindy Richards. She was tall, slender, and exuded an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Her long auburn hair cascaded down her back in glossy waves, and she wore a red designer dress that hugged her figure. As soon as Cindy entered, Thomas rushed to her side, placing a hand gently on her lower back as he guided her around. Molly's stomach twisted, not just from her pregnancy, but from an unsettling sense that something was terribly wrong. Throughout the evening, Molly observed how Cindy clung to Thomas's arm, laughed at his jokes with exaggerated enthusiasm, and batted her eyelashes every time he looked her way. She also noticed how Thomas barely acknowledged Molly's presence. When she refilled Cindy's wine glass, the woman didn't even look at her. Instead, she continued conversing with Thomas as if Molly were invisible, more of a maid than a wife. Tears pricked Molly's eyes. She felt reduced to a servant in her own home. At one point, Cindy remarked, "Thomas, darling, you really do know how to throw an exquisite party. I only dine at the best places. Thank you for providing that even in your private home." Thomas responded with a wide grin. "Anything for you, Cindy." Those words stung like tiny knives slashing at Molly's heart. During the main course, Molly retreated to the kitchen, fighting back tears. She told herself to remain strong. There was no need to make a scene in front of Thomas's guests. She kept her composure, forcing herself to serve dessert with a placid smile. She couldn't stop glancing at Cindy's perfectly manicured fingers resting on Thomas's arm. The entire night, Thomas never once introduced Molly as his wife. He simply called her the hostess. When the guests finally left, Molly confronted Thomas. He dismissed her concerns, accusing her of overreacting. "You knew I had to charm these investors, and Cindy is one of them," he insisted. "Stop making everything about yourself." That night, Molly cried herself to sleep, physically and emotionally exhausted. The child in her womb stirred, almost as if sensing her despair. She stroked her belly and swore to her unborn child that she would protect them at all costs, no matter what lay ahead. The days following that dinner were some of the most excruciating of Molly's life. Thomas often disappeared for entire nights, returning just before dawn. Her suspicions grew stronger, but every time she tried to broach the subject, he lashed out. One evening, after he stayed out until morning, Molly mustered the courage to directly ask about Cindy. He exploded in anger, shouting, "She's a vital part of my business expansion. Stop nagging me. Can't you see I'm doing this for our future?" Molly retreated, stunned. She was tired of living in constant doubt, but any confrontation seemed to push Thomas further away. She realized she couldn't endure the emotional roller coaster for much longer. In desperation, she confided in her friend Donna Wheeler, who came over to the penthouse with warm hugs and whispered comforts. Donna had always been protective of Molly, fiercely so, and she bristled with anger, hearing how Thomas was treating her pregnant friend. "This is unacceptable, Molly," Donna said, her eyes flaring with indignation. "You need to talk to a lawyer about your rights." It was around this time that Molly also confided in Chef Michel Dupont, Thomas's old colleague. Chef Michel had previously admired Thomas's ambition, but even he admitted that something seemed off about Thomas's behavior. He encouraged Molly to trust her instincts. Michel, being well connected in the culinary world, also hinted that he had heard rumors Cindy Richards was not just some random investor. She was rumored to be intimately involved with Tomas, even traveling abroad with him under the guise of business trips. Molly's suspicions were brutally confirmed. Still, Molly's heart clung to hope. She wanted to believe in the man she married, the one who once twirled her around in his arms and kissed her under the moonlight. The father of her unborn child couldn't possibly be so cold and callous, but with every passing day, the evidence grew irrefutable. One morning she discovered a string of explicit text messages on Thomas's phone while he was showering messages from Cindy. Reading them made Molly's knees buckle, her breathing ragged. She shut the phone and ran to the bathroom to confront Thomas. Sopping wet, a towel around his waist, Thomas glared at her. "How dare you snoop through my phone?" he barked. He showed no remorse, merely anger that his secrets were exposed. Devastated, Molly demanded an explanation. The argument escalated until Thomas finally spat words she'd never forget. "You're nothing but a burden to me right now. If it wasn't for my image, we'd already be divorced." Those words struck Molly in her very core. She stormed out, tears streaming as she clutched her belly protectively. She walked aimlessly through Manhattan until Donna came to pick her up, consoling her as she sobbed uncontrollably. That night, Molly decided she needed a plan, a way to break free, find security for herself and her unborn child, and protect her sanity. Molly spent the next few weeks carefully collecting evidence and documenting Tomas's erratic behavior. She kept track of phone bills, took photos of suspicious charges on their joint accounts, and even recorded some of their arguments on her phone. She was terrified, especially since Tomas still wielded enormous power. He had money, influence, and a reputation that made people revere or fear him in the culinary world. But Molly, guided by her friend Donna's advice, consulted with a discreet lawyer named Carlton Wheeler, Donna's cousin. Carlton listened intently to Molly's story. He was outraged by Thomas's conduct and promised that if she wanted to leave him, she could do so with the law on her side. Molly felt a flicker of relief, but she was also deeply conflicted about the future of her baby. What kind of father would Tomas be? She envisioned her child growing up in a broken home, possibly used as a pawn in business deals or neglected as Tomas spent more and more time with his mistress. That same month, an incident finally pushed Molly beyond her breaking point. She found out that Tomas had invited Cindy over once more without informing her. She arrived home to see Cindy sitting at their living room piano, wearing a smug smile. Instead of greeting Molly properly, Cindy lifted a flute of champagne in a mocking toast. Molly's hands shook. She felt humiliated in her own home. "Set the table, will you?" Tomas said curtly, barely glancing at Molly's swollen belly. "Cindy and I are starving. The chef is on his way." Numb, Molly did as told, tears burning her eyes. She was forced, once again, to serve dinner, while her husband and his mistress laughed and clinked glasses. That night Molly slept in the guest bedroom. The next morning she packed a suitcase, determined to leave. Yet Tomas discovered her half-filled bag and erupted in anger, grabbing her wrist so tightly she yelped in pain. "You think you can just walk away and leave me looking like the bad guy?" he hissed. "You have no idea the power I hold." Molly's voice trembled. "I'm not leaving because of how it looks. I'm leaving because you don't love me, because you humiliate me." Tomas scoffed, releasing her wrist. "Fine, go ahead. See how far you get without my money." She left that day, moving into Donna's spare bedroom. She found solace there, as Donna helped her reconnect with her parents and gather support. For 2 weeks, Molly didn't hear from Tomas. In that silence, she expected some attempt at reconciliation. None came. The heartbreak was agonizing, but a new resolve took root in Molly. She realized that no matter how bleak things looked, she had to protect her child, and she had to protect herself. During the final months of her pregnancy, Molly initiated divorce proceedings. She sought spousal support and child support, though the process was complicated by Thomas's legal team. They seemed determined to drag her through the mud. Rumors circulated that Molly was a gold digger who married Thomas for his fortune. There were false accusations claiming she had affairs, which were obviously untrue. Each blow pained Molly deeply, but her lawyer, Carlton Wheeler, advised her to remain calm and let the evidence speak for itself. In the meantime, she picked up small jobs. Despite her advanced pregnancy, she gave piano lessons to neighborhood kids, grateful for any independence she could earn. She also volunteered at a local children's art school, an echo of the dream she had once shared with Thomas. If she couldn't open her own center yet, she would at least continue spreading the joy of art to young hearts. On a rainy afternoon in late October, Molly's water broke unexpectedly at Donna's apartment. Panic and excitement mingled as Donna rushed Molly to the hospital. After several grueling hours of labor, Molly gave birth to a baby girl whom she named Eva Morgan Delgado. Holding Eva in her arms, Molly felt a surge of love so powerful it eclipsed every ounce of pain Thomas had inflicted. She vowed to give her daughter the best life possible, with or without Thomas's support. Thomas arrived at the hospital eventually, but only after being prompted by a call from Molly's lawyer. He made a brief appearance, his eyes scanning the tiny baby as if she was merely a curiosity. He kissed Molly on the forehead, a gesture that felt hollow, then returned to making phone calls. Cindy was texting him incessantly. Even in that precious moment, he was more concerned with the mistress and the restaurant than his newborn daughter. Unsurprisingly, Thomas's involvement in Eva's early months was minimal. He occasionally sent gifts or a nanny to check on the baby, but seldom visited. Molly found the courage to move back to Bridgeport, where her parents lived. She wanted Eva to have a stable, loving environment, and her parents welcomed them both with open arms. Feeling safe for the first time in a long while, Molly allowed herself to heal emotionally. However, at night, she would often stare at her sleeping daughter and wonder how she would ever provide a secure future without Thomas's financial backing. Even if the courts granted child support, there was no telling how effectively Thomas's lawyers might stall or reduce the amount. Little did she know, fate had some unexpected turns in store. One chilly winter morning, Molly received a phone call from an old contact in the restaurant business, Chef Michel Dupont. He was passing through Connecticut and suggested they meet at a local cafe. Bundling up Eva, Molly walked the few blocks from her parents' home to the cafe, feeling a surge of nostalgia for the days when she used to accompany Thomas to such establishments. Yet, as she entered the cafe with Eva, she reminded herself that her life was now on a different path. Michel greeted her warmly, ordering hot chocolate for both of them. He then revealed he had recently expanded his own culinary enterprise to include a consultancy branch. "Molly," he said, "I want to open a fine dining restaurant in Bridgeport, but I need a managing partner who knows the local community and can handle the administrative side. I'm great in the kitchen, but I'm clueless about finance and marketing. Would you consider working with me?" Stunned, Molly blinked. She had never run a business before. "Why me?" she asked, taking a sip of her hot chocolate to steady her nerves. Michel explained, "I saw how you managed certain aspects of Thomas's early ventures, even if he never gave you proper credit. You have a passion for hospitality, you're good with people, and you deserve an opportunity to shine on your own terms." A flicker of excitement sparkled in Molly's eyes. This could be the chance she needed to find independence, to secure a future for Eva without relying on Thomas. Still, she was scared of stepping into the cutthroat culinary industry, especially with so much emotional baggage tied to restaurants. After a moment's thought, She recalled her father's words. Your dreams are always worth fighting for. Maybe this was a sign. She looked at Eva, then at Michelle, and nodded. I'll do it. I'll learn everything I need to learn. Thank you for believing in me. Michelle grinned, relieved. They spent hours discussing potential names, menus, themes, and location scouting. Molly felt a surge of purpose coursing through her veins. After so many months of feeling helpless and trapped, she finally saw a path forward. Over the next year, Molly immersed herself in her new role. She learned about budgeting, permits, hiring staff, and social media marketing. The restaurant, named M&M Bistro, short for Michelle and Molly, quickly gained traction in Bridgeport. As the head chef, Michel dazzled the community with his signature French-infused culinary style. Meanwhile, Molly's warm demeanor and strong organizational skills made the establishment run like a well-oiled machine. Customers loved the friendly environment Molly cultivated. She greeted regulars by name, offered coloring sheets to children, and initiated monthly fundraisers for local charities, merging her passion for the community with the restaurant business. Little Eva often sat in a corner of the restaurant, charming the patrons with her wide-eyed curiosity. The staff adored their little mascot, and Molly found a new family among the chefs and servers. With M&M Bistro thriving, Molly gained confidence. She tackled the final stages of her divorce proceedings with renewed determination. Tomas, preoccupied with his own empire, and entangled in scandalous rumors regarding Cindy's extravagant lifestyle, frequently missed court dates. He tried offering Molly small settlements to keep her quiet, but Molly rejected them, knowing she deserved fair treatment for Eva's sake. Finally, the divorce was granted, awarding Molly primary custody of Eva and a reasonable child support agreement. While collecting that support would prove to be another challenge, Molly felt victorious, standing on her own 2 feet. She had come a long way from the pregnant woman, forced to serve dinner to her husband's mistress in her own home. As Molly's life blossomed, Thomas faced increasing setbacks. Rumor had it that his affair with Cindy became public knowledge, damaging his public image and unsettling his investors. Cindy, now bored with the repeated cycle of lavish parties, had begun seeking new thrills. She was spotted with other wealthy entrepreneurs, fueling more gossip. The once admired power couple of Tomas and Cindy started to fracture. To make matters worse, Tomas's flagship restaurant in Manhattan suffered from negative press. Health inspectors fined them for various violations. Key staff quit because of Thomas's volatile temper, moving on to competitor establishments. Thomas poured money into damage control, but the hits kept coming. Lawsuits from disgruntled employees and vendors sprang up, draining Thomas's resources. He found himself scrambling to keep afloat. Then came the final blow. Cindy decided she wanted to marry someone else, an up-and-coming tech mogul who promised more international travel and less drama. She left Tomas abruptly, taking a significant portion of the restaurant's capital that she had invested. Tomas was left humiliated, financially strained, and facing legal battles on multiple fronts. Word in the culinary community was that Delgado's Manhattan was on the verge of bankruptcy. The once mighty Thomas Delgado found himself perilously close to losing it all. One crisp winter day, Molly received a call that would change her life yet again. An investor group that once partnered with Tomas wanted to discuss a confidential opportunity. Surprised, Molly agreed to meet them at a hotel lounge in New York City. She was greeted by 2 impeccably dressed men who introduced themselves as part of an investment consortium. They explained that Thomas's flagship restaurant, Delgado's Manhattan, was going under, and they had the rights to sell it. "We followed your success with M&M Bistro," one of them said. "We believe you're exactly the kind of fresh leadership Delgado's Manhattan needs to restore its reputation. We want to offer you a controlling stake at a competitive price." Molly's jaw dropped. The very restaurant that symbolized her greatest humiliation was now being offered to her. Thoughts collided in her mind. Why on earth would she want that place, riddled with financial troubles and bad press? Yet she recognized an opportunity for redemption. It wasn't just about taking over a failing restaurant. It was about rewriting her narrative and proving to herself, once and for all, that she was more than just a scorned ex-wife. Michel was hesitant when Molly told him about the proposal. "Are you sure you want to inherit that mess?" he asked, concerned. It could be a money pit, but Molly saw beyond the risk. She saw potential. If she could turn Delgado's Manhattan around, it would become a phoenix rising from the ashes, and so would she. After careful negotiations, Molly struck a deal with the investors. She used her savings, along with some help from a local business loan, to acquire majority ownership. Thomas was still the nominal founder, but he owned a negligible share now, forced to relinquish most of his stake to pay off debts. The day Molly walked into Delgado's Manhattan, as the new owner, her heart pounded with a mix of nerves and triumph. Staff whispered in awe, recognizing the new boss as the former Mistress Delgado. Taking over Delgado's Manhattan was no small feat. The restaurant's reputation was in tatters. Morale among the employees was at an all-time low, and the decor, once opulent, was now in desperate need of a refresh. But Molly had faced adversity before. She assembled a strong management team, bringing on experienced professionals who believed in her vision. Together, they revamped the menu, refined the service, and launched a public relations campaign highlighting the restaurant's new direction. Inevitably, Molly ran into Thomas, who still roamed the premises from time to time, clinging to whatever sliver of control he imagined he had. One afternoon, as Molly was discussing the new cocktail menu with the bar manager, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Enjoying your little reign, Molly?" Thomas sneered, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The once suave entrepreneur looked disheveled. Dark circles underscored his eyes, and his designer suit hung loosely on a thinner frame. Molly remained poised. "I'm here to run a professional establishment, Thomas. If you're not contributing, please don't disrupt our progress." His lip curled. "You think you can overshadow me, the Delgado name, after everything? Don't you remember who put you on the map in the first place?" A wave of old pain threatened to resurface, but Molly steadied herself. She recalled the times he made her serve Cindy dinner while she was pregnant, the times he dismissed her as nothing, the times she sobbed into her pillow wondering why she wasn't enough. But she was no longer that vulnerable, intimidated woman. "Yes, I remember perfectly," she replied, staring him down. "And I also remember who tore me down. But I'm standing here now, moving forward." "It's time you did too." Thomas said nothing, merely scowling as she walked away. In that moment, Molly realized that she had reclaimed her power. The fear that once paralyzed her was gone. She was more than a footnote in Thomas Delgado's story. She was now the author of her own. Over the following months, Molly tirelessly oversaw renovations and rebranding. She renamed the establishment Eva's Manhattan in honor of her daughter. The fresh paint, elegant lighting, and newly designed logo breathed life into a space that had once seemed haunted by bad memories. She modernized the menu, integrating a fusion of international dishes with a classy American flair, hiring top-notch chefs who wanted to be part of something new and exciting. Word began to spread that a transformation was underway. Food critics ventured back in, intrigued by the shift in ownership. Positive reviews slowly emerged, praising the culinary rejuvenation and the warm, welcoming atmosphere curated by the new management. Where patrons once complained of pretentiousness and declining food quality, they now marveled at the attention to detail and the genuine kindness of the staff, a reflection of Molly's leadership. Tomas lingered on the periphery, occasionally dropping by unannounced. Each time, he seemed more disconsolate, watching from the sidelines as Molly's vision blossomed. Cindy Richards, the mistress, was long gone, rumored to be engaged to a European billionaire. Tomas, meanwhile, was saddled with debts and legal troubles. He became more of a sad spectre than a threat, no longer the mighty power player who once humiliated Molly. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Molly decided to host a grand re-opening event. She invited community leaders, long-standing patrons, staff from her first restaurant in Bridgeport, and, most importantly, family and friends who had supported her journey. The highlight of the event was a heartfelt speech she gave, thanking her parents for their unwavering love, Donna Wheeler for always standing by her side, Chef Michel Dupont for believing in her potential, and little Eva for being her biggest inspiration. As applause thundered, Molly felt tears gather in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. She reflected on how far she had come from a pregnant, humiliated wife to the triumphant owner of a prestigious Manhattan restaurant. Life was unpredictable, but it was also filled with second chances. Though Molly had little desire for any personal contact with Tomas, she was mindful of Eva's future. One afternoon, she approached him cautiously, extending an olive branch regarding Eva's upbringing. "Tomas, whatever happened between us, Eva is your daughter. If you want to be part of her life, I won't stand in the way, as long as you treat her with the love and respect she deserves," Molly said gently. His eyes flickered with regret. For a moment, the old Tomas, the caring, charismatic man she once married, seemed to resurface. "I know I've done terrible things, Molly," he admitted, his voice shaking. "I lost sight of what matters. If you'll let me, I'd like to see Eva occasionally." Molly hesitated. Thomas's track record wasn't great, but she believed in giving people an opportunity to change, especially when a child's well-being was at stake. She nodded. "We can try supervised visits for now, but if I see anything that harms her, it ends." Thomas nodded in agreement, swallowing his pride. He knew he was in no position to negotiate. Over time, he made small steps to be a better father, sending Eva birthday gifts, attending her kindergarten recital. He continued to grapple with his personal demons and financial struggles, but at least he tried to be civil with Molly for their daughter's sake. Though Molly had little desire for personal contact with Tomas, she could not deny that their daughter, Eva, had a right to know her father, provided he showed genuine remorse and a willingness to act responsibly. She was determined not to let her own grievances rob Eva of the potential for a meaningful relationship. And so, one late afternoon, as the sun cast golden light across the polished bar counters of Eva's Manhattan, Molly decided it was time to extend an olive branch. She approached Thomas with measured caution. He was standing near the hostess station, scanning a copy of the day's receipts, as if longing for a sliver of the authority he once claimed so effortlessly. When Molly called his name, he turned, his tired eyes filled with something akin to relief and perhaps a bit of guilt. "Thomas," she said softly, her voice steady, "I know we've had a terrible history, and there's no changing what happened. But Eva is your daughter, and I won't stand in the way of you being part of her life, so long as you treat her with love and respect. I want you to be there for her, if you can truly commit to that." His gaze faltered. The weight of his choices, the affairs, the public scandals, the financial ruins, seemed etched in the lines on his face. Molly could still recall his once radiant confidence, but now he looked like someone who'd lost his way in a maze of self-created disasters. For a long moment he said nothing, and she wondered if he would spit venom again or dismiss her as he once had. But instead, his words came out in a ragged whisper. "I know I've done terrible things," he admitted, dropping his gaze to the floor. "I lost sight of what mattered. Eva doesn't deserve to be punished for my mistakes. If you'll let me, I'd like to see her. I'll do whatever it takes to prove I can be better." Molly hesitated. She thought back to all the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, pregnant and alone in that penthouse. She remembered the sting of betrayal, the humiliating moments serving Cindy at dinner. So much anger remained, yet she heard her mother's gentle counsel in the back of her mind. Holding on to bitterness ties you to the past. Sometimes offering grace sets you free. "All right," she said at last. "We can start with supervised visits. We'll see how Eva adjusts. And if I sense anything dangerous or hurtful, it ends immediately." "Understood?" Thomas nodded, swallowing his pride. The hush in the restaurant was palpable, and Molly became aware that some staff had paused to look on. Sensing a private moment, she gave a small nod to the closest server, who discreetly ushered the curious staff away, granting them privacy. Over the following months, Thomas made slow but discernible efforts to be a presence in Eva's life. He sent thoughtful gifts for her birthday, nothing extravagant, just simple tokens like art kits and storybooks that indicated genuine interest. He appeared at her kindergarten recital, quietly watching from the back row as Eva performed a shaky but adorable rendition of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Molly, seated in the front, stole a glance at him afterward. His eyes were moist, a reflection of regret, and perhaps love he'd once failed to give. Still, Molly maintained her boundaries. She arranged for the first visits to happen at her parents' house in Bridgeport, where Eva felt safe and comfortable. Robert and Iris Morgan welcomed Thomas politely, though they remained guarded. He would sit on the living room rug, playing with Eva's dolls or coloring books, looking almost boyish in his attempts to connect. Sometimes, Molly stayed in the kitchen, listening to their laughter and the occasional awkward silence. She found herself torn between relief and lingering fear, relief that her daughter might have a father figure. After all, fear that Thomas's presence could reopen old wounds if he failed to stay committed. At the same time, Molly was discovering a new level of respect and authority in her professional life. Ever since she rebranded Delgado's Manhattan to Eva's Manhattan and breathed fresh life into its menu, staff culture, and decor, the restaurant had experienced a remarkable turnaround. Food critics wrote glowing reviews about the thoughtful fusion cuisine and the warm, inclusive atmosphere that Molly fostered among the servers and chefs. She took her role as owner seriously, dedicating long hours to perfecting every detail, everything from the flower arrangements in the foyer to the lighting that set the mood at each table. She conducted weekly staff meetings not just to discuss profit and loss, but to ensure everyone felt heard. She organized team-building events, championing the idea that a motivated, happy staff would translate into a memorable dining experience for patrons. Gradually, as word of Eva's Manhattan spread, local media outlets began to invite Molly for interviews. She hesitated at first, recalling how her personal life once made headlines under humiliating circumstances. But she refused to be paralyzed by that shame any longer. She accepted invitations to talk about her perspective on restaurant leadership, on creating community-focused spaces in a high-pressure industry, and on balancing entrepreneurship with single parenthood. Each interview boosted her confidence further, validating her past struggles as a stepping stone to the woman she had become. During these interviews, she seldom mentioned Thomas by name. She refused to center her success on his downfall. Instead, she talked about resilience, the importance of leaning on friends, and the power of forging a supportive work environment that valued empathy as much as efficiency. Those watching could sense her authenticity, and in an industry often fueled by ego and cutthroat competition, Molly's humility and openness set her apart as a leader worth admiring. As her public profile grew, so did her internal sense of purpose. She began to partner with local charities, hosting fundraiser nights at Eva's Manhattan. One special evening, She collaborated with a youth arts program, an echo of the dream she once harbored to open her own children's art center. The event featured live performances by young musicians, dancers, and visual artists from underprivileged communities. At the end of the night, the restaurant donated half its proceeds towards scholarships for aspiring artists. Watching the kids perform under the sparkling chandeliers, their eyes alight with creativity, Molly felt an indescribable warmth flood her chest. This was what success meant to her, using her position to lift others. Meanwhile, Molly's staff treated her like family. She made sure to give each person a chance to grow professionally. When the head hostess showed an interest in marketing, Molly arranged for her to shadow the social media consultant. When a line cook expressed a passion for pastries, Molly introduced him to a renowned pastry chef friend for mentoring. "I want to see you all rise with me," she told them repeatedly. "Because when we rise together, we build something that lasts." One night, long after closing, Molly found herself alone in the dining area, tidying up stray menus and napkins. She glanced through the large windows onto a hushed Manhattan street. The city lights shimmered, the sidewalks nearly empty at that late hour. A gentle, gratitude-filled smile found her lips. Here she was, once the humiliated wife, forced to serve her husband's mistress while carrying his child, now a successful restaurateur whose establishment was fast becoming a Manhattan landmark. She recalled Thomas's smug warning all those years ago, "See how far you get without my money." And yet, here she stood, forging her own legacy. Sure, she'd used the funds from the settlement to secure a portion of the restaurant's purchase, but the driving force behind its success was her own perseverance, vision, and compassion. In that introspective silence, Molly also recognized how her personal healing paralleled the restaurant's revival. She had rebuilt her life, piece by piece, creating a safe, nurturing environment not only for her staff and customers, but also for herself and her daughter. No longer was she defined by Thomas's shadow or Cindy's intrusion. She had stepped fully into her power, growing into a woman who could command respect simply by walking into a room with quiet confidence. And so, as the hum of the refrigerators lulled softly in the background, Molly turned out the lights and locked the doors behind her. She left Eva's Manhattan for the night, letting her mind wander to the promise of tomorrow, a life where she remained the author of her own story, unafraid of challenges and steadfast in her newfound strength. If the past had been her crucible, the present was her victory lap, and the future hers to shape. Late one evening, Molly stood behind the grand doors of Eva's Manhattan, preparing to host an event unlike any the restaurant had seen before. She felt a mix of excitement and nostalgia coursing through her veins. This was the same place where she once suffered profound humiliation, forced to serve dinner to her husband's mistress while heavily pregnant. Now, she was about to welcome patrons, community leaders, and loved ones to witness a new era of success and unity under her leadership. The restaurant gleamed with fresh energy. New chandeliers cast warm, inviting light onto circular tables draped in crisp white linens. A reimagined mural stretched across one wall, depicting stylized images of family, community, and vibrant, artistic swirls, a subtle homage to Molly's long-held dream of fostering creativity among children. The dinnerware was polished to a shine, the silverware meticulously arranged. Everything reflected Molly's commitment to excellence and her belief in making every guest feel genuinely valued. In the foyer, staff waited with calm anticipation. Some had been with Molly since the early days of her rebranding. Others were new hires, thrilled to join a place that had become legendary in Manhattan for its welcoming atmosphere. They chatted, straightened their uniforms, and exchanged encouraging smiles. Beyond the glass doors, Figures moved on the sidewalk as guests began to arrive. Some were family and friends, while others were influential figures from the culinary world, local charities, and even a handful of well-known journalists hoping to capture the story of this restaurant's rebirth. Molly, poised in a sleek but understated black dress, glanced at her reflection in a decorative mirror near the entrance. For a moment, she hardly recognized the woman gazing back at her. Gone was the timid, uncertain person overshadowed by Thomas Delgado's empire. In her place stood a confident business owner, a loving mother, and a woman who had wrestled with betrayal only to emerge stronger and more compassionate. She took a final, steadying breath and opened the doors with a broad smile. An immediate rush of voices, greetings, and flashing cameras filled the foyer. As guests spilled in, hugging Molly or shaking her hand, she thanked each of them for being there. Family friends from Bridgeport exclaimed how beautiful the restaurant looked. A couple of local TV reporters asked if they might grab a brief interview. Molly graciously obliged, stepping aside to answer questions about the establishment's transformation and her hopes for the future. Toward the back of the crowd, she spotted her parents, Robert and Iris Morgan, beaming proudly. They waved her over, and she wove through the throng of people to greet them. Robert, tall and dignified with silver hair, pressed a gentle kiss to his daughter's forehead. Iris squeezed Molly's hand, tears shining in her eyes. "I can't believe how far you've come," her mother whispered. "We always knew you had it in you, my love." Molly hugged them tightly, feeling her heart swell. She remembered the days she'd shown up on their doorstep pregnant, devastated, and uncertain about her future. Back then, she wasn't sure she'd ever stand on her own 2 feet. Now, here she was, hosting a celebratory soiree in a place that once symbolized her greatest shame. It was an extraordinary full-circle moment. Not far from her parents stood Chef Michel Dupont, the first person to believe in Molly's ability to run a restaurant. He waved her over, wearing his signature chef's coat, his gentle smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Everything looks marvelous, Molly," he said, standing with a group of press members. "The new menu we designed is already wowing them." Nearby, the aroma of seared scallops, saffron-infused risotto, and freshly baked artisan bread promised a feast to come. Molly introduced Chef Michel to the journalists, praising his culinary genius and dedication to philanthropy. She felt genuine gratitude for his role in her life. Without his early invitation to co-manage a restaurant in Bridgeport, she might never have found the courage to launch her own ventures. Together, they had proven that empathy, teamwork, and unwavering vision could thrive in an industry known for its cutthroat nature. The evening wore on, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of jazz music floating from a small band stationed near the bar. Servers glided through the crowd with trays of artfully plated hors d'oeuvre, roasted fig crostini, delicate salmon tartare bites, and miniature chocolate mousse cups garnished with edible flowers. Molly made her rounds, greeting each table with warmth. Some guests recalled the restaurant's turbulent past under Thomas Delgado's ownership. But now, the mood was one of renewal and optimism. Amid this flurry, Molly caught sight of her friend Donna Wheeler at a corner table, sipping a flute of champagne. Beside her was Donna's husband, who winked at Molly in approval. Molly excused herself from another conversation and made her way over to them. Donna stood, enveloping Molly in a tight hug. "Look at you, boss lady," Donna teased, her eyes twinkling. "And to think we used to sit in our college dorm talking about your future as an art teacher." Molly laughed at the memory. "I'm still teaching in my own way," she replied, gesturing to the staff bustling about. "I just happen to be teaching restaurant etiquette and community building instead of painting techniques." They both giggled before Donna grew momentarily serious. "You deserve this night, Molly, the success, the respect, the joy. Never forget that." The words filled Molly with an indescribable sense of validation. It felt good to pause for a moment and let the significance of the occasion wash over her. Then, through the archway leading to the main dining space, she noticed someone she didn't expect, Tomás Delgado. He stood partially in the shadows, dressed in a subdued suit, clearly uncertain whether he belonged. Since signing over control of the restaurant to Molly, he had largely stayed away, occasionally dropping by to negotiate financial matters or to see Eva under supervised conditions. His face was etched with regret, as if he couldn't fully grasp how the restaurant he once owned had become a beacon of hope and success under his ex-wife's leadership. Molly's initial instinct was to tense. She recalled the humiliations he had inflicted, the bruising words, the nights when he chose Cindy Richards over her. But she also remembered her newfound commitment to moving forward not as a victim, but as a person who had surmounted betrayal and heartbreak. Tonight was a night of celebration, and she refused to let old resentments poison it. Taking a breath, she walked over to him, meeting his conflicted gaze head-on. "Thomas," she began quietly, her tone neither cold nor overly friendly. "Thank you for coming." He cleared his throat. I hope it's all right that I'm here. I just wanted to see how you've transformed this place." He turned his eyes around the bustling room, clearly overwhelmed by the rapturous energy. "It's magnificent." Molly studied his features in the soft light. The once confident man who had seemed invincible now looked introspective, unsure of himself. She could see a swirl of emotions lurking behind his eyes: shame, envy, perhaps a flicker of pride for her achievement. Whatever bitterness she once felt had been replaced with a firm resolve to maintain peace. "Enjoy the evening," Molly replied, gesturing to the waitstaff who roamed with trays of champagne and appetizers. "Get something to eat, if you like. And if you want to talk about Eva's next visit, we can discuss that another time." Tomás nodded, looking simultaneously relieved and embarrassed. "Thank you," he murmured. With that, Molly turned away, heading back into the sea of guests. She refused to let his presence disrupt her night. Instead, she focused on the beaming faces of friends, colleagues, and family who had come to celebrate her new beginning. Later in the evening, after the formalities and speeches concluded, the band struck up a livelier tune. Some guests took to the makeshift dance floor, swaying with easy laughter. Molly's parents departed early, kissing her goodbye as they wanted to drive back to Bridgeport before it got too late. Donna also bid her farewell, promising to call the next day to gush about every detail. Soon, the crowd began to thin. By midnight, only a handful of staff remained, tidying up the dining area and ensuring everything was in order for the following day. Exhausted yet elated, Molly removed her heels and padded toward the restaurant's bar, pouring herself a small glass of sparkling water. She took a seat at one of the high stools and observed the now empty space. The remnants of the celebration lingered: a few stray balloons, confetti sparkling on the floor, half-burned candles flickering on tables. She felt an overwhelming sense of completion. In a single evening, she had symbolically closed the door on her painful past, transforming the place of her greatest heartbreak into a testament to renewal. Footsteps echoed behind her. Turning, she found Donna had returned. She'd forgotten a jacket. "Couldn't leave without saying a proper goodbye," Donna teased, retrieving her sleek blazer from a nearby chair. Molly motioned for her friend to join her at the bar. "One last toast," she suggested, raising her sparkling water. Donna nodded, grabbing a nearby flute of the leftover champagne. "To everything we once thought impossible," Molly said, holding her gaze, "to rising above betrayal, to new beginnings." They clinked glasses, smiling softly. For Molly, the moment was more than a toast. It was an acknowledgement that life had tested her in unimaginable ways, but she had persevered and thrived. Her heart brimmed with gratitude for the people who stood by her, the daughter who gave her hope, and the self-belief she discovered through adversity. "I'll be back early to help with the post-party cleanup," Donna said, placing her half-empty flute on the bar. "Now go home and get some rest, woman of the hour." After Donna left, Molly remained behind a few minutes longer, locking up and double-checking the security system. She stepped out into the cool Manhattan night, the city lights reflecting in puddles along the sidewalk. As she walked to her car, she inhaled deeply, savoring the crisp air that carried the distant hum of traffic. An overwhelming sense of peace washed over her, unlike anything she had experienced in years. Her mind drifted to Eva, who was already asleep at her grandparents' house. Molly smiled, thinking of all the blessings she wanted to pass on to her daughter: courage, kindness, empathy, resilience. She now felt equipped to give Eva a life filled with possibility and guided by the lessons she had gleaned from her own trials. In many ways, Eva's Manhattan was more than a restaurant. It was a living symbol of transformation, hope, and triumph. When Molly finally slid into the driver's seat, she took one last moment of reflection, leaning her head back against the rest. She thought of the naive young woman she had been, the heartbreak she had endured, and the powerful woman she had become. Her story was no fairy tale. It was full of rough edges and painful chapters, but that made the victory all the sweeter. Tomorrow, she would be back in the office, ready for meetings, menu tastings, and staff consultations. In a month, she planned to host another fundraiser for a local children's art initiative. And in the coming years, she dreamed of opening a second Eva's Manhattan in another city, perhaps even branching into a chain of community-centered restaurants. This time, she knew that no ambition was out of reach. Molly Delgado closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for how far she'd come. Then, with renewed purpose and a heart bursting with optimism, she turned the ignition and guided her car through the neon-lit streets. For the first time, she felt that her life, like the restaurant bearing her daughter's name, was truly her own. And as she drove home, she was no longer haunted by the past, but propelled by the boundless promise of tomorrow. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of heartbreak, resilience, and ultimate triumph. Molly Delgado's tale reminds us that we are capable of so much more than we realize, even when facing life's toughest storms. From the depths of betrayal to the pinnacle of success, her story is a testament that true strength emerges when we refuse to be defined by our darkest moments. If Molly's journey inspired you, then help spread her message of hope and determination. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who might need an uplifting reminder that they, too, can overcome any challenge, and be sure to subscribe to this channel for more dramatic, motivational stories from real-life events. Together, let's continue supporting each other and celebrating the victories that arise from life's biggest struggles. Your support truly means the world.
What happens when the perfect life is a perfect lie? For Rosalind Hayes, her Manhattan penthouse was a gilded cage, and her millionaire husband, Brecken Holt, was the keeper. She was his beautiful, intelligent, and completely controlled wife. When she told him she was pregnant with their first child, she expected joy. Instead, in a moment of unimaginable cruelty, he told her the 5 words that would ignite a fire within her. "You'd be nothing without me." 3 years later, with his empire in ashes and filing for bankruptcy, a mysterious, silent buyer purchased the wreckage of his company. He had no idea who it was, until she walked through the door. This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of the ultimate checkmate. The air in the penthouse on Central Park West was always the same, chilled to a precise 68 degrees, infused with the faint, clean scent of white calla lilies and thick with unspoken rules. This was Brecken Holt's world, And Rosalind Hayes, his wife of 4 years, was its most prized, most carefully curated possession. To the outside world, they were a portrait of modern success. Brecken, at 36, was the charismatic, photogenic founder of Holt Innovations, a tech firm that had ridden the wave of a single, brilliant logistics algorithm to a 9-figure valuation. He was a darling of the financial news circuit, with a jawline as sharp as his business acumen and a smile that could disarm senators. Rosie, at 30, was the perfect complement. With a mind as sharp as his, she'd been a top analyst at Goldman Sachs. Before he'd convinced her to retire, she was beautiful, elegant, and radiated a quiet intelligence that made her an impeccable hostess. She ran their homes in Manhattan, the Hamptons, and St. Bart's with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 CEO. Her days a blur of managing staff, planning charity galas, and ensuring Brecken's life remained a frictionless glide toward ever greater glory. The love she'd once felt for him hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It had become a complex, layered thing, like a fossil preserved in amber, beautiful to look at, but cold and hard to the touch. The passionate, ambitious man she'd fallen for had been slowly consumed by the billionaire he'd become, a man who saw everything, including his wife, as an asset, a reflection of his own greatness. He didn't abuse her in the conventional sense. There were no bruises, no raised fists. His control was far more insidious. It was in the way he'd suggest her outfits, the way he'd dismiss her opinions on finance, with a patronizing chuckle, the way he'd isolated her from her old ambitious friends from her banking days, calling them a distraction. Tonight was the annual Holt Innovations Autumn Gala, a landmark event on the New York City social calendar. Rosie stood before the full-length antique mirror in their dressing room, a sea of dove-grey silk by Giambattista Valli cascading around her. A rope of Mikimoto pearls, a surprise, from Brecan felt cool and heavy against her skin, less a gift than a set of beautiful, tasteful shackles. She had news. Wonderful, terrifying, life-altering news. For 2 weeks, she had held the secret close to her heart, a tiny, warm spark in the cool, sterile perfection of her life. She was pregnant. She'd practiced telling him 12 times. She'd imagined a quiet moment after the party, with the city lights twinkling below, where she would take his hand, and he would, for the first time in years, look at her, and not his reflection in her eyes. She imagined his surprise, melting into a genuine, uncalculated joy. Brecan strode into the room already in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "The car is downstairs. Are you ready? Marcus Thorne is coming tonight. I want to make sure we have a united front. He's been sniffing around our data contracts." He scanned her from head to toe, his eyes missing the subtle, nervous tremor in her hands. "The dress is good, elegant. The pearls work." He adjusted his bow tie, his gaze fixed on his own reflection in the mirror behind her. "Brecken, I have something to tell you." She began, her voice softer than she intended. "Can it wait?" "Rosie, we're about to be on stage, metaphorically speaking. It's important." He finally turned to her, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. "What is it?" Her carefully rehearsed words evaporated. "I'm pregnant," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. For a moment, there was silence. Brecken's face was a blank canvas. He didn't smile. He didn't move closer. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, flickered down to her flat stomach, and then back up to her face. He was processing, calculating. Not a father-to-be, but a CEO assessing a new, unexpected variable. "Well," he said slowly, a strange, unreadable expression settling on his features. "That's a development. A development." The word landed like a stone in her gut. "Brecken, it's a baby. Our baby." "I'm aware of the biology, Rosalind," he said. His tone clipped. He walked over to the marble-topped bar in the corner of the dressing room and poured himself a whiskey, his back to her. "This is going to complicate things. The St. Bart's trip in January, the expansion launch in Q2, your focus will be divided." The cold dread that had been a faint hum in her life for years was now a roaring siren. This was not the reaction she had braced herself for. Even in her most pessimistic scenarios, she hadn't envisioned this. "My focus," she whispered, her hands instinctively going to her stomach. "Brecken, this is our life. This isn't a business plan." He finally turned, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. And then he smiled, but it was the smile he used for corporate takeovers, the one that was all teeth and no warmth. It was a predator's smile. "Everything is a business plan, my love," he said, his voice dropping to a low, condescending purr. He started walking toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. "You wanted a career, remember? In that piranha tank downtown. You were good, I'll grant you that. But look at what I've given you. This apartment. The clothes, the staff, the name. You have a life people would kill for a life you don't have to lift a finger to maintain." He was in front of her now, so close she could smell the expensive single malt on his breath. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of her hair behind her ear, his touch feeling proprietary, not affectionate. "But don't ever get confused, Rosie," he continued, his voice a venomous whisper. "Don't ever think that your contribution to this partnership is equal to mine. I built this world. You just live in it." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. "How can you say that to me? Tonight of all nights." His eyes hardened, the mask of civility dropping away completely, revealing the cold reptilian arrogance that lay beneath. "Because you need to understand the reality of your position," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "You are the beautiful wife of Brecken Holt. You are the mother of my future heir. Those are your roles, and you perform them beautifully. But make no mistake," he leaned in his voice, dropping to a final devastating whisper that would echo in her mind for years. "You'd be nothing without me." He straightened his tie, his expression once again smooth and unruffled, the perfect mask of the charming billionaire back in place. "The car is waiting," he said, as if he'd just commented on the weather. "Let's not be late." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Rosalind standing in a cloud of grey silk and shattered dreams. The pearls felt like a lead weight, now pulling her down into a cold, dark abyss. The tiny warm spark of her secret. Her baby was still there, but it was no longer just a spark of life. It was a spark of fury. In that moment, standing alone in the opulent silence of her cage, Rosalind Hayes did not crumble. She did not weep. A terrifying, crystalline calm washed over her. The analyst, she had been the woman who could spot a fatal flaw in a balance sheet from a mile away, suddenly saw the fatal flaw in her own life. He was right about one thing. She was the wife of Brecken Holt. But he was wrong about everything else. She wasn't just a resident in his world. She was a silent partner. And he had just declared war. Rosalind did not follow him down to the car. She stood in the dressing room for a full 10 minutes, the sound of her own steady breathing, the only anchor in the spinning vortex of her thoughts. The hurt was a physical thing, a crushing pressure in her chest, but beneath it, something new and hard was beginning to form. Resolve. She walked over to the window, looking down at the river of yellow cabs and black cars flowing along the edge of Central Park. He had built this world. He was right. But builders could become complacent. They could forget to check the foundations. With a clarity that was almost frightening, she saw her path forward. It wasn't a path of tearful confrontations or dramatic exits. Brecken thrived on drama. It fed his ego. A public fight would only frame her as the hysterical, ungrateful wife. No, her departure would be as quiet and calculated as a line of code in his precious algorithm. She went to the gala. She descended the grand staircase on his arm, her smile serene, her eyes betraying nothing of the cataclysm that had just occurred. She charmed Marcus Thorne. She laughed at the mayor's jokes. She played the part of Mrs. Breckan Holt to perfection one last time. Every polite nod, every sip of champagne was an act of rebellion. He watched her, a smug satisfaction in his eyes, believing he had put her back in her box. He had no idea she was mentally packing it for storage. The next morning, while Brecken was in a board meeting, Rosie made 2 phone calls. The first was to a discreet real estate agent, instructing them to find a modest, secure 2-bedroom rental on the Upper West Side under a private trust she had maintained from her Goldman Sachs days. The second was to the one person in the world she knew would understand, without judgment, her grandmother Isabel Moreau, a retired history professor, living a quiet life in upstate New York. "I need to come see you," Nana Rosie said, her voice steady. "I've been waiting for this call for 2 years," Isabel replied, her voice warm and wise. "The kettle is on." 2 days later, with Brecken on a business trip to Hong Kong, Rosie executed her plan. She didn't pack the couture gowns or the diamond earrings. She packed her old textbooks from Wharton, a few simple clothes, and the contents of a small safe hidden behind a panel in her closet. The nearly $1 million she had left from her own bonuses and investments, a nest egg. Brecken had dismissed as pocket money. She left a single, simple note on the cold marble of the kitchen island. "Brecken, I am going to have our baby. I will be in touch through my lawyer regarding the next steps. Rosalind." There was no emotion, no accusation. It was a memo, a corporate communication. She knew it would infuriate him more than 1,000 tears. The reunion with Isabel was a quiet balm for her wounded soul. Her grandmother's small, book-filled house smelled of old paper and Earl Grey tea. Isabel, with her sharp eyes and soft smile, listened to the entire story, without interruption. When Rosie finished, the older woman simply refilled her teacup. Men like Brecken Holt build their empires on the idea that they are singular, that their genius is unique, Isabel said, her gaze steady. They forget that every empire is supported by 1,000 invisible hands. Your hands were among them, my dear. He just never bothered to look. Isabel then led her to the study. She pulled out a dusty box filled with old photographs and documents. "My husband, your grandfather, was an engineer, not a flashy one. He designed municipal water filtration systems. Boring but essential. He had this idea years ago about using a new kind of membrane for industrial water recycling. It was too expensive, then the technology wasn't quite there, but he believed in it. She handed Rosie a thick, leather-bound journal filled with schematics and equations. For the next month, Rosie didn't just hide. She studied. She lived in her grandmother's quiet house, her mornings spent walking in the crisp autumn air, her afternoons and evenings devouring her grandfather's work. Her background wasn't in engineering, but it was in analysis. She could see patterns, opportunities, and financial viability where others saw technical jargon. The world was moving towards sustainability, a concept Brecken had always sneered at as hippie nonsense. He was focused on speed and data. He was ignoring efficiency and responsibility. The market gap was right there. Companies were spending billions on water usage and waste disposal. If a system could be developed to make industrial water recycling dramatically more efficient and cost-effective, the potential was limitless. Her old fire, the ambition she had suppressed for years, roared back to life. She wasn't just going to survive. She was going to build. 7 months later, heavily pregnant and living in her anonymous Upper West Side apartment, Rosalind Hayes officially incorporated Aura Sustainables. The name was a private joke. Brecken had always told her she had a lovely aura. Now it would be the name of his undoing. Her first hire was a brilliant, disgruntled chemical engineer named David Chen. Rosie had remembered him from a Holt Innovations Company picnic. Brecken had publicly belittled David's concerns about the environmental impact of a new data center, dismissing him in front of his peers. Rosie had seen the shame and anger in the young engineer's eyes. She found him working for a competitor, underutilized and frustrated. She met him in a sterile coffee shop, her baby bump a clear statement of her new life. She didn't offer him a massive salary. She offered him 20% of the company and a single promise: at Aura, the best idea will always win. No ego, just innovation. David Chen, a man who had been starved of respect, saw the conviction in her eyes. He read her grandfather's journals and her updated business plan. He quit his job the next day. They started in a small rented lab space in Long Island City, a world away from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. Their seed money was Rosie's pocket money. While Brecken was gracing the cover of Forbes, Rosie was learning about polymer chemistry and fluid dynamics. 2 weeks before her due date, their first prototype, combining her grandfather's theories with David's modern engineering, yielded a result in a test environment that was 35% more efficient than any existing system on the market. It was their eureka moment. The day she went into labor, Brecken's lawyers were still sending her threatening letters, offering a generous settlement in exchange for her silence and compliance. She ignored them. She gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl. As she held the tiny, perfect infant in her arms, she looked at her daughter's sleeping face and named her Aurora. For the dawn, a new day. Holding her daughter, Rosalind felt a peace she hadn't known in years. The rage was still there, but it had been forged into something stronger purpose. This wasn't about revenge anymore, not entirely. It was about building a legacy for her daughter, a world where no one would ever tell Aurora Holt that she would be nothing without a man. She would be the woman who built the empire, and she was just getting started. Aura Sustainables operated in stealth mode for the first 18 months. Rosie knew that the moment Brecken caught wind of her venture, he would use his immense resources to crush it, not for business reasons, but out of pure, spiteful ego. She kept the company name off industry papers, networking quietly using David Chen as the technical face, while she, as the anonymous CEO, managed strategy, finance, and operations from their humble headquarters. Her life was a carefully balanced routine of motherhood and entrepreneurship. Her days started and ended with Aurora. The hours in between were a caffeine-fueled marathon of investor pitches, patent filings, and supply chain negotiations. Her modest apartment was filled with the scent of baby powder and industrial schematics. She had traded gala gowns for comfortable sweaters and chauffeur-driven town cars for the F train to Queens. She had never been happier. The breakthrough came from an unexpected quarter. Rosie targeted a mid-sized textile manufacturing company in North Carolina, a family-owned business struggling with rising utility costs and new environmental regulations. They were precisely the kind of client Brecken's firm would never bother with. Rosie flew down herself with David and gave them a presentation. She didn't just sell them a product. She showed them how Aura's system would integrate into their existing infrastructure, projecting a 40% reduction in water costs within 2 years. She offered them the system at cost with a payment plan tied to their actual savings. It was a risk, but a calculated one. The company Miller Textiles agreed. 6 months later, the results were even better than projected. Miller Textiles became their first, most fervent evangelist. Word began to spread through the tight-knit manufacturing community. Aura wasn't just a concept, it worked. Suddenly, bigger clients came calling. A food processing giant, a paper pulp manufacturer, even a microchip fabrication plant that was hemorrhaging money on ultra-pure water. Rosie and David refined their technology, secured 2 more key patents, and expanded their team. Rosie's pocket money had transformed into a company with a respectable valuation and, more importantly, a healthy cash flow. She finally moved Aura into a sleek, modern office in Brooklyn, a space filled with natural light, living green walls, and a palpable energy of excitement. She was a different woman from the one who had graced the society pages. Her features were sharper, her gaze more direct. The quiet elegance was still there, but now it was backed by an undeniable authority. She was no longer Mrs. Brecken Holt. She was Rosalind Hayes, CEO. Brecken's fall. While Rosie was building, Brecken was over-leveraging. His initial fury at her departure had curdled into a dismissive arrogance. In his mind, she was living off her little fund, in some sad apartment, a cautionary tale he likely told his sycophants. He never once considered she could be a threat. His world was the only one that mattered. The fatal flaw in Brecken's empire was Brecken himself. Holt Innovations had been built on one great idea. But Brecken had come to believe he was an infallible visionary. He shut out dissenting voices in his boardroom, promoting yes-men and firing anyone who questioned his grand pronouncements. His rival Marcus Thorne watched and waited like a patient vulture. Brecken's big mistake had a name, Project Chimera. It was a hugely expensive, deeply speculative venture into predictive AI for global shipping logistics. It was brilliant on paper, but the real-world application was a nightmare of complexity and unreliable data. His engineers, the good ones who were left, warned him it wasn't ready. His CFO warned him that they were borrowing too heavily to fund the R&D using their stable logistics contracts as collateral. Brecken, high on his own press clippings, ignored them all. He announced Project Chimera at a lavish press conference, promising it would change the world and double the company's value within a year. The market reacted with initial excitement, but as months passed with no viable product, skepticism grew. The first crack appeared when their largest client, a massive international shipping conglomerate, got spooked by Holt Innovations' mounting debt and the lack of progress on Chimera. Marcus Thorne, whose own company offered a less flashy but far more reliable service, swept in and poached the contract. It was a loss of 30% of Holt's annual revenue in a single blow. Panic began to set in behind the scenes. To cover the cash flow shortage, Brecon made another reckless move. He took out a high-interest bridge loan from a ruthless private equity firm, a firm known for asset stripping. He was sure Chimera would launch any day, and he could pay it back in a month. But Chimera failed. A disastrous live demo for potential investors showed the AI misrouting a fleet of virtual ships, sending them into a simulated cyclone. The stock price of Holt Innovations, once a Wall Street darling, cliff-dived. Margin calls were triggered. The private equity firm called in its loan with predatory penalties attached. The decline was swift and brutal. Within 6 months, Brecon's world imploded. Headlines that once praised his genius now screamed of his hubris. Holt's Chimera a fantasy, read one Wall Street Journal exposé. Billionaire to bankrupt, questioned another. He was forced to sell the Hamptons estate, then the St. Bart's villa. The private jet was repossessed. He was a pariah, the man who had flown too close to the sun and had his wings of ego melted away. Rosie watched it all from her Brooklyn office, her face a mask of calm. She read the financial reports, the creditor filings, the desperate press releases. She felt a grim, cold satisfaction, but it was tempered by the memory of the man she had once loved. This wasn't just a corporate failure. It was the complete self-destruction of a human being. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, the news broke across every financial terminal in the country. Holt Innovations, unable to service its mountain of debt, was officially filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Its assets, patents, and contracts would be auctioned off to the highest bidder. David Chen walked into Rosie's office and placed a printout of the announcement on her desk. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It's over," he said softly. Rosie looked at the paper, then out to the window at the Manhattan skyline, a glittering mirage across the river. Brecon's penthouse was up there somewhere, a monument to a fallen king. "No," she said, a new steely glint in her eyes. She turned back to David. "It's not over. It's the opportunity we've been waiting for. Get our bankers on the line. I want to put together a bid." David's eyebrows shot up. "A bid? For the whole thing, Rosie, we'd have to leverage everything." "I know," she said, her voice devoid of any doubt. "He told me I'd be nothing without him. It's time I showed him what I've become." She was no longer just building her own company. She was about to acquire the ruins of his. The news of Holt Innovations. Chapter 11. Filing spread through the financial world like a contagion. It wasn't just a business failure. It was a morality play, a spectacular Icarus story for the digital age, and everyone wanted a front row seat. The company, once a titan, was now a carcass, surrounded by circling predators. Creditors clawed for priority rivals, sharpened their knives to carve away the most lucrative client contracts, and opportunistic private equity firms began calculating how many cents on the dollar they could salvage from the wreckage. In his glass-walled penthouse, a prison he would soon be evicted from Brecon Holt, was drowning in a sea of legal notices and vitriolic press clippings. He was a man besieged not only by his creditors, but by his own suffocating pride. He barely registered the specifics of the bankruptcy proceedings, the legal machinations feeling like a distant droning noise. The process was a public flogging, and he refused to watch. He knew his arch-rival Marcus Thorne would be leading the pack of bidders, a fact that festered in his gut like a hot coal. But beyond that, the details were a blur. The idea that Rosalind, a woman he pictured living a small, sad, provincial life, funded by his past generosity, could be a player in this arena, was less than a fantasy. It was a cosmic impossibility. Meanwhile, across the East River, in a sunlit corner office in a Brooklyn high-rise, Rosalind Hayes watched the same news unfold, but through a different lens. Her office at Aura Sustainables was the antithesis of Brecken's former headquarters. Instead of cold marble and steel, it was warm woods, living green walls, and vast windows that framed the Manhattan skyline, not as a conquest, but as a neighbor. The atmosphere wasn't one of ruthless competition, but of focused collaborative energy. David Chen, now her chief technology officer, walked into her office without knocking a tablet in his hand. He had the same quiet intensity as the day she'd hired him, but now it was underscored by the confidence of success. "It's official," he said, his voice low. He placed the tablet on her polished desk. The headline from the Wall Street Journal blared in stark black and white Croft Innovations files for Chapter 11. Protection. Rosie stared at the words, her face a mask of calm. For a long moment, she said nothing. There was no surge of triumphant glee, no desire to gloat. Instead, she felt a profound and somber sense of gravity, as if she were watching the final inevitable move in a chess game she had started 3 years ago. It was a grim, cold satisfaction, the validation of a path she had chosen in the darkest of moments. "Leverage everything?" David asked softly, reading the unreadable look in her eyes. "Rosie, a play for their assets. It would mean putting Aura at risk. We're stable, we're growing, but this is a different league." She finally looked up from the tablet, and her eyes, clear and resolute, met his. "It's the reason the game began." "David," she said, her voice steady. "He built his empire on a single brilliant piece of technology that he eventually took for granted. The company around it became toxic, but the core asset, the original logistics algorithm, is still gold. We're not buying the poison. We're surgically extracting the cure." She stood up and walked to the window, gazing at the distant, glittering island. "He told me I would be nothing without him. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about proving a fundamental business principle, a foundation of true value will always outlast an edifice of ego." Her resolve was absolute. "Get our bankers and our legal team on a conference call. I want to form a new acquisitions entity within the hour, and I want it to be a ghost." The war room at Aura Sustainables buzzed with a quiet, intense energy. Rosie, flanked by her CFO, a sharp and cautious woman named Maria, and her lead counsel Ben, laid out her plan. "An anonymous bid is our only play," Rosie stated, pacing before a whiteboard covered in financial projections. "If my name or Aura's is attached to this, it becomes a media circus. It becomes personal. Brecken's pride is a cornered animal. He would try to burn the whole forest down rather than see me take it. This has to be judged on its merits alone. It must be a clean, emotionless business transaction." Maria pushed her glasses up her nose. "Rosie, the cash requirement for a clean bid will be substantial. We'd be extending ourselves to the absolute limit, all our capital plus a significant line of credit." "I'm aware of the risk," Rosie countered, her tone leaving no room for debate. "But our analysis shows that the algorithm's licensing potential alone will cover the debt service within 18 months. It's a calculated risk, not a reckless one. It's the kind of move Brecken would have been too arrogant to make. They established the Shell Corporation, a sterile entity based in Delaware with the deliberately forgettable name Northbridge Acquisitions. It was a perfect corporate veil, a blank slate designed to attract no attention. Through this cutout, Rosie's team went to work performing a surgical dissection of Holt Innovations' books. They ignored the failed flashy projects like Chimera and focused entirely on the core assets, the algorithm, a handful of valuable patents, and the list of neglected but still viable enterprise clients. The bidding process was a silent, high-stakes poker game. As expected, Marcus Thorne came in strong, his bid designed to absorb Holt's client list into his own empire. But his offer was complex, filled with contingencies and stock swaps. It was a typical corporate takeover bid. Then the offer from Northbridge Acquisitions landed on the trustee's desk. It was a masterpiece of strategic finance. It wasn't the highest possible valuation, but it was clean, all cash. It offered to make the senior creditors whole, almost immediately sidestepping the years of legal wrangling they might face with other offers. It was structured to be the quickest, simplest, most painless solution for a bankruptcy court eager to close the books on a messy, high-profile failure. In his own boardroom, Marcus Thorne was furious. "Who the hell are these Northbridge people?" he snarled at his team of lawyers. "Where did they come from?" But every inquiry led to a dead end, a law firm in Wilmington, an accounting firm in Chicago. The ghost was holding its form. For Rosie, the next few days were an exercise in supreme control. She went about her duties at Aura, taking meetings, reviewing product timelines, and spending her evenings reading bedtime stories to Aurora. But beneath the surface, a current of intense anticipation hummed. Every ping of an email, every phone call sent a jolt through her system. It was the thrill of the hunt, the same feeling she used to get at Goldman Sachs just before a major trade, but amplified 1,000 times over. This wasn't just about money. It was about the entire trajectory of her life. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was Ben, her lawyer. "We got it," he said. And for a moment, the professional composure in his voice cracked with excitement. "The court approved our bid. Thorne is out. The trustee went with the clean all-cash offer. It's done, Rosie. You own it." Rosie sank into her chair, the phone pressed to her ear. She closed her eyes, and a single slow breath escaped her lips. There was no shout of victory. There was only a quiet, profound sense of arrival. She had reached the destination she had set for herself in the darkness of her old dressing room 3 years ago. She opened her eyes and looked at the small, silver-framed photo on her desk, a smiling, gap-toothed Aurora on a swing. This was for her. "The trustees are arranging a final handover at the old headquarters tomorrow at 10 a.m. Ben continued, his voice returning to its usual lawyerly cadence. "To formally accept the keys, access codes, that sort of thing. They're expecting a mid-level associate from the firm representing Northbridge. I can have someone there." This was the final piece. The clean, anonymous victory. The logical, sensible, and safe conclusion. But as Rosie looked out the window at the distant island of Manhattan, she knew the story couldn't end with a proxy. A chapter like this didn't deserve to be closed by a stranger. "There's been a change of plan." "Ben?" she said, her voice acquiring a new, steely tone. "I'll be attending myself." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You personally, Rosie, is that wise?" The point of the shell was to avoid a confrontation. "The point of the shell was to win," she corrected him gently. "And we've won. This is something else." She stood up, her posture straightening, her resolve hardening into its final form. "It's not about wisdom. It's about closing a chapter. I started this story with him. I think it's only fitting that I'm there to write the last word." The headquarters of Holt Innovations was a mausoleum of ambition. The air, once electric with the frantic energy of 1,000 ringing phones and 100 simultaneous conversations, was now stagnant and heavy. Dust motes danced like tiny ghosts in the shafts of late-morning light, slanting through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The silence was the most profound change. It was an active, oppressive presence that amplified every small sound, the distant wail of a siren on the streets, below the low hum of the climate control, the scuff of Brecon Holt's own $1,000 shoes on the polished concrete floor. He stood in the center of the main floor, a king surveying a graveyard. 3 days ago, this space had been a chaotic hive of departing employees carrying cardboard boxes filled with personal effects and withered desk plants. Today it was just an echo chamber of his failure. The frosted glass walls of his former office, where he had once made and broken fortunes with a single phone call, were now just blank panes reflecting a distorted, hollowed-out version of himself. Brecon felt a familiar, bitter bile rise in his throat. He had been commanded to be here by the court-appointed trustee, a man named Peterson, whose face was a permanent mask of weary diligence. It was a final, theatrical humiliation, the deposed monarch, forced to hand the keys of the castle to the conqueror. He was waiting for a representative from a phantom entity, North Bridge Acquisitions. The name itself was an insult in its blandness. He pictured some smug 28-year-old MBA in a slim-fit suit, barely able to contain his glee at picking over the bones of a giant. The thought made Brecon's hands clench into fists at his sides. He walked over to the windows, forcing himself to look at the view that had once been his daily affirmation. The jagged skyline of Lower Manhattan, the distant glint of the Statue of Liberty, the ceaseless flow of traffic over the Brooklyn Bridge. It had all felt like his kingdom. He had consumed this city, made it his own. Now it looked alien, indifferent. He replayed the catastrophic failure of Project Chimera for the 1,000th time. But in his version of the story, he remained the tragic hero. He had been betrayed by disloyal engineers, sabotaged by a volatile market, and hunted by jealous rivals like Marcus Thorne. The fault was everywhere but within himself. The chime of the main elevator was a sharp, intrusive sound that broke his reverie. The glass doors slid open with a soft hiss. Brecon didn't turn. Let the vulture come to him. He kept his back to the entrance, a pathetic last-ditch attempt at projecting power he no longer possessed. He heard footsteps, but they weren't the heavy, assertive tread of a man. They were lighter, quicker. A steady, rhythmic click-clack that seemed to cut through the heavy silence with an unnerving precision. The sound was a ghost. It was a sound from a past life. A sound he associated with black tie galas, polished marble foyers, and the woman who had once been the perfect silent accessory to his ascent. Annoyance warred with a strange, unwelcome flicker of memory. He finally turned his face set in a mask of contempt, ready to dismiss whoever this was. And the world stopped. It was Rosalind. She stood 20 feet away, a portrait of serene power. The 4 years that had passed since he'd last seen her had not aged her. They had forged her. The soft vulnerability he had prized and exploited was gone, replaced by a formidable stillness. She wore a tailored pantsuit in a shade of deep navy that was almost black, its sharp lines speaking of authority, not adornment. Her hair, which she used to wear in soft waves around her face, was pulled back into a sleek, elegant knot at the nape of her neck, revealing the determined set of her jaw. There was no artifice to her, no plea for approval. She simply was. Brecon's brain failed to compute. The carefully constructed narrative of his mourning, the faceless corporate vulture, his own righteous indignation, shattered into a million pieces. This did not fit. It was an anomaly, a glitch in the code of his reality. Rosie. The name came out as a strangled whisper, rough and incredulous. He felt a wave of dizziness. What in God's name are you doing here? His mind grasped for the only possible explanation. Did you come to see it for yourself? To gloat? Are you that pathetic Mr. Peterson, the trustee, who had been standing discreetly by a desk stacked with document boxes, stepped forward? He looked from Brecken's thunderstruck face to Rosalind's calm demeanor, his own expression a muddle of professional duty and utter confusion. Mr. Holt, the trustee, said, his voice hesitant. Forgive me. You know this woman. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. This is the representative from Northbridge Acquisitions. The word seemed to bend the air in the room. Brecken's head snapped from Peterson back to Rosie, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying comprehension. He felt the blood drain from his face. Northbridge, he repeated, shaking his head a desperate, jerky motion. No, that's a lie. That's impossible. Rosalind took 2 deliberate steps forward, the soft click of her heels the only sound. Her gaze never left his, and in their depths he saw no hatred, no pity, just an unnerving, absolute clarity. She reached into the slim leather portfolio she carried and retrieved a single document. She didn't hand it to him. She held it up for him to see. It was the executive summary of the acquisition printed on crisp letterhead. Northbridge Acquisitions. At the bottom, a signature was scrawled in bold, confident ink. Rosalind Hayes, President. It's very possible, Brecken, she said. Her voice was the biggest shock of all. It was the same melodious voice he remembered, but the soft, deferential undertones were gone. It was honed to a fine edge, the voice of a CEO accustomed to being heard, to giving orders, to closing deals. He recoiled, as if the paper had burned him. You, he finally choked out, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You did this how with what the little trust fund I so generously let you keep. He let out a laugh, a raw, ugly sound that was more of a sob. You think I'm a fool? Who are you fronting for? Is it Thorne? Did he pay you to do this to humiliate me one last time? That's where you've always been wrong. Brecken, she replied, her calm composure, a wall against which his fury broke and dissipated. You never thought I could be anything but a reflection of a man. You saw an ornament. You never bothered to look at the mind. You called my life savings pocket money. I called it seed capital. She took one more step, closing the distance between them. The clean, subtle scent of her perfume. Something new, something he didn't recognize reached him. For 3 years, while you were building a monument to your own ego, I was building a company. You were on the cover of magazines. I was filing patents. You were hosting parties. I was meeting with engineers. It's called Aura Sustainables. She said the name, dropping into the space between them like a perfectly weighted stone. We're in the industrial water recycling and sustainability sector. A niche, you once told me, was hippie nonsense. But it turns out responsibility is very, very profitable. The name registered dimly. Aura Sustainables, a rising star in the green tech space. He'd seen the name in passing in financial reports he'd barely scanned, dismissing it as irrelevant to his high-flying world of AI and global logistics. The realization hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. It wasn't Marcus Thorne. It wasn't some Wall Street firm. It was her. All of it. "You bought my company," he said, the statement flat, devoid of emotion, the final acknowledgement of a truth too monstrous to fight. "I bought the assets out of bankruptcy," she corrected him, her precision a quiet cruelty. "I bought your brilliant, neglected logistics algorithm. I bought your client list. I bought these servers and a few key patents." She gestured with a sweep of her hand at the cavernous, empty room. "I bought the bones, Brecken, because the rest of it, the arrogance, the reckless gambling, the part of the company that was a reflection of you that was the liability. It was worthless. It's what sank the entire ship." He finally looked away from her, his gaze falling to the floor. The intricate web of his self-deception, the narrative of betrayal and sabotage he had so carefully woven, was completely incinerated in the face of the simple, devastating truth. He hadn't been hunted by a rival. He had been outmaneuvered by the one person on Earth he had deemed utterly insignificant. His mind reeled back in time to that dressing room. The scent of her perfume. The cool weight of the pearls in his hand. The intoxicating feeling of his own power as he delivered the line that had, he thought, put her in her place forever. "You'd be nothing without me." As if she had plucked the memory directly from his collapsing mind, her expression softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of profound, resonant irony. "You told me I would be nothing without you," she said, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper that was somehow louder than all his shouting had been. It was for him, and him alone. "But you were wrong. I wasn't nothing without you, Brecken. I was just getting started." She let the words hang in the dead air between them, a final damning epitaph for the man he used to be. She paused, then delivered the final quiet blow. "The real question is, what will you be without all of this?" He had no answer. He could only stare at her, the fight, the rage, the pride, all of it draining out of him, leaving a vast, cold emptiness. He was nothing more than a hollowed-out man in a rumpled suit, standing in the wreckage of his own life, brought down by the woman he had created, but not in the way he ever intended. Rosalind held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned to the stunned trustee. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice once again, crisp and professional. "I believe we are concluded here. My operational team will be in touch to manage the final asset transfer." She gave Brecken one last lingering look. It was a look devoid of triumph or malice. It was a look of closure. She had done it, not for revenge, not anymore, but for herself, for the little girl named for a new dawn. Without another word, Rosalind Hayes turned and walked back toward the elevator, her heels clicking with a steady, unhurried rhythm that echoed in the cavernous space. It was the sound of a woman walking away from a past she had conquered and toward a future she had built. The glass doors slid open. She stepped inside, a brief, powerful silhouette, and then she was gone. Brecken Holt was left alone in the crushing silence, the scent of her perfume a ghost in the air. He stumbled back until his legs hit the base of his old, empty desk. He sank into the chair that was no longer his, the silence of the room pressing in on him, final, absolute, and complete. He was nothing. Rosalind's story is a powerful testament to the fire that can be forged in the face of betrayal. It's a reminder that underestimation is the greatest weakness of the arrogant, and that true strength isn't about the life you're given, but the one you have the courage to build for yourself. She didn't just get revenge. She rewrote her own destiny and created a legacy for her daughter Aurora. Her checkmate wasn't just about buying a company. It was about buying back her own power, her own name, What did you think of Rosalind's incredible journey from a gilded cage to the CEO's chair? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this story as inspiring as we did, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more true life stories of resilience, triumph, and the incredible power of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.